Hi, everybody. My name is Tara Galanders, and I am the Membership and Projects Manager for the Allied Arts Council. So I'd just like to tell you a bit about us. The Allied Arts Council is a 63-year-old multidisciplinary arts service organization located in Lethbridge. We manage CASA, our Community Arts Center, which includes a robust education and gallery program. We also operate a fine arts and crafts store in downtown Lethbridge called AAC Works. And as well, we develop programming which supports both the visual and performing arts, such as Arts Days, Christmas at Casa, the Upside Downtown concert series, and a whole lot more. We're very fortunate city to have such a robust arts organization. And I am now would like to introduce you to tonight's speaker, who I think is going to speak to a topic which is really very important and something we have been encouraging people to talk about, that art is work and art should be remunerated accordingly. The work you do is valuable to our community. So a little bit about Chris W. Carson, the Executive Director of CARFAC. He has an undergraduate, with undergraduate studies completed at the University of Alberta and an M.F.A. in painting from the University of British Columbia. Chris is both a professional visual artist and arts administrator. His arts career includes exhibitions at public, artist-run, and commercial galleries throughout Alberta. As an administrator, Chris worked for commercial and public art galleries, a professional arts organization, and 2 provincial arts services organization. And he has been the executive director of CARFAC Alberta since August 2010. So take it away, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to be sharing my screen, but yeah, we'll be doing that right now. Okay, sharing my screen. So I just go into, okay, we'll just start from here. Okay, anyway. Thank you, Tara, and thank you to the Allied Arts Council of Lethbridge for inviting me to do this presentation here tonight. So what we are going to do is, this talk is called, Why Do Artists Need to Be Paid? And tonight, we are going to look at why artists should be paid. We will explore how to charge for your artwork. And we're going to deal with all kinds of other ways that visual artists can make money from their art practice. We will learn about what best practices are and how they can help us in making money and in professionalizing our art practice. This talk will teach us a bit more, to be a bit more professional in our art practice, no matter why we make art. Now, always when I begin to put a talk together, I do research on the internet. And the internet, when it's used wisely, you can learn about anything. And so I kind of start this off by looking up, should artists be paid? And then I get to all kinds of pages where people write articles about this. This is just one where this is an artist blog who wrote kind of 10 reasons why artists should be paid for artwork. Some of them are kind of similar in a certain kind of way, but they are very reasonable sorts of statements, like the artist spends just as much, if not more money than we'd like in order to maintain the creative flow. The artist deals with just as much, if not more, than any other entrepreneur in regards to our share of annoyances, and has just as much work anxiety. The artist deals with just as much, if not more, of unreal expectations. So these are 10 reasons the artist has to locate their audience, create their fan base, and we have to deliver. So artists, visual artists, do much more or just as much as plumbers or any other kind of career out there where people do get paid. So, you know, sometimes I look at some of these funny sorts of things that you get. There's kinds of sites called for exposure. And some of these are actually quite interesting when you think of them. You know, this second one especially, we are looking for a photographer to document poverty in the United States in a thoughtful way. And then it says no pay. You know, this is just absolutely amazing that people would have the gumption to put that out there. And then you get examples of major stores in basically major stores in England. This is Sainsbury, who is a major store like Loblaws or Superstore, where they ran an ad like, we're giving you an opportunity to build your career and build your reputation, and your work on our walls will contribute to our success. Share your gifts, leave your mark by doing what you love to do best. And this store makes $26 billion a year, and that's their profits. And they're asking an artist to do something for free. That's a kind of really ridiculous sort of situation when you really think about it. Okay, here's some advertisements by an artist who actually writes things about artists who work for exposure. The second one I really think is kind of interesting. If we had money for this, we're going after real artists who paint on real canvases, not the digital fake stuff. I mean, this is sometimes what we have to deal with as artists, where people expect us to just work for exposure. Another example, this is a kind of cartoon about the disadvantages of working for exposure, where it's another kind of exposure, kind of the mooning yourself or whatever. You know, speaking of exposure, is this what it's about? So this is what art groups, what art organizations have to do, what all artists have to do. They have to start thinking that their work is valuable and it deserves to be paid. Okay, now here's just one more article from the internet. Next time someone wants you to do something for free, consider this. And just so you know, everybody, Tara, I'm prepared to share all these things because we're not reading everything that I write. So I'll send these images to Tara, so they will be available in case anybody wants to read them in full later on. But this is an article where somebody actually writes about what they find is the really problematic, and they look upon their career and the problems they have. And they've had issues when they did something for free or when they did it on the cheap. And why? Because they say in some ways it's kind of insulting. Over the years, the projects that have caused me the biggest grief have always been the free ones or the cheap ones. And this last paragraph, I suggest you take a moment right now and think about the following. How many hours have you actually spent learning about what you do? How much time have you invested in educating yourself? How much money have you invested in your chosen business? How much has getting to this point cost you? So art, visual arts, is a career. It's not just the 2 hours we might spend on a project that could denote the price. It's also the fact that we might have 4 years of professional training, and we might have been working to achieve these things for 5 or 10 years or more in order to achieve something. That's what constitutes value. Okay, and I'm not going to really get into this in this talk, but we could go to the web and just find out what famous people say, just why is art important anyway? And then we get things from people like Aristotle or Vincent van Gogh. And it just shows that no matter what, art is important, okay? The aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but the inward significance, is what Aristotle said centuries ago. And I want to touch people with my art. I want them to say, he feels deeply, he feels tenderly, is a quote from Vincent van Gogh. Art is important. Okay, so what are we going to do tonight? And how can we make money from our art practice? Okay, so there's 3 ways that we're going to identify that we're going to talk about in the next 30 minutes, okay? Selling our art pieces to a buyer where you will retain the copyright. We get money from our art practice through copyright. This would be licensing our artwork for things like calendars, book covers, maybe the label on a beer, maybe the label or a restaurant cover. And we also get money by the things that are kind of associated with the arts, by teaching, by giving artist talks, by sitting on an art jury, by using some of the skills that we have learned. So that's what we're going to be discussing over the next little while. Okay, money. I'm the executive director of CARFAC Alberta, and probably the thing that CARFAC is most known for is these 5 words: has the artist been paid? So question mark. That's what groups like CARFAC are advocating for, so that people kind of realize that art is not just something that we do for fun. Art can be a lot of work. Art is work, and art deserves to be paid for. That's what organizations like CARFAC advocate for. Okay, so how do we make money from our art practice? The first way we're going to be discussing is by selling our pieces to a buyer where you retain the copyright. So what we're going to do is just talk a bit about how do we price things. Now, we make art, I'm sorry about that for the phone, but it's supposed to be answered in a second. You make art for many reasons. Now, some of these reasons may not be even commercial, but art clearly has a value. So how do we price our work? So these are the things that we consider when we're thinking of how do we price our work. How much money did it cost to make? So the cost of the materials. Then we think about how long did it take us to make this piece, the labor cost. We then think about the idea of size. Size does matter. A 20 by 30 inch acrylic on canvas should definitely cost more than an 8 by 10 inch acrylic on canvas. Now we have to think about, where are we marketing these things? Where are we going to sell these artworks? If you are selling your work at a flea market down the road, you will be charging a lot less than if you're marketing your artwork in New York and Santa Fe. Now, you have to stop. You have to do a reality check. Okay, so then we have to think about, are you being realistic? You have to begin to compare yourself with others at your level of expertise and for the quality and size, etc. So this is what a commercial gallery would tell you to do. Start with low prices and move your prices up as demand increases. Now, here are some of the important things to do when you're deciding how much you should be charging. You have to track your sales. You have to maintain records. Always monitor your costs. Keep an inventory. Watch the market. Review your progress annually and vary prices accordingly. Okay, now this is how some people charge for their work. They do it based on the size and the demand for their work. So sometimes you do it by the width of your piece, You add it with the height of your piece and you times it by a factor. And then you get a price. So we're going to show you some examples here. Okay, so the factor is determined by the price of similar sized work on the market, created by artists at a similar career stage. And the third part is sold through similar channels. So determining a base point for initial weighting, this could be based on the price of your existing sales for similar work, the cost of the materials, the points mentioned in the previous slide. So let's get to some examples. So what you have to be thinking about over time is inflation, increases in your sales, and market trends. Okay, but when you're doing this, you have to remember that art is not always like selling widgets. You have to always consider what you want in career, but you have to remember that art has a value. Okay, so here's just some examples of weighting factors, okay? If you were doing, say, a 24 by 36 inch work on canvas. So you would add 24 by 36, the inches, you would get 60. And if you were using a weighting factor, say of 1, that would be $60. Now, if you were using a weighting factor of 3, that would be $180. If you were using a weighting factor of 10, that would be $600. So this is kind of how you kind of do these sorts of things. Like you set the idea that every 24 by 36 inch painting you did would sell for a similar price, and your prices might start lower, and as you get an audience, you become a bit more well-known, you would charge definitely more money. So you might start your works at $180, and maybe in 5 years or 10 years, you would be charging $1,800 for the same size piece. So the important things as we go again is to always track your sales. It's always vital to maintain records of what you're doing and always monitor what your costs are. What are your costs of materials? You have to keep an inventory. Watch the markets. What are the markets doing? What is selling? What is not selling? You have to review your progress and you vary the prices accordingly. Okay, now we're going to go into something that's kind of more of an economic model of how we should be thinking about how we price our work. So there's an artist who graduated from AU Arts with this Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Studio Arts or whatever, B.F.A. And she went on to California where she took a joint Masters of Fine Arts and Masters of Business Administration. So she developed a kind of model where you have to think about the economics of what you're doing when you're trying to sell things. And so she kind of said things like, consider everything on the basis of expenditure and income. And do not overlook any aspect of your art and life. She suggests you make a comprehensive budget first, then you begin to work at prices. And don't be confined to making art that fits your budget. Make your budget fit your art. Use economics to make the work you want. So in other words, she's saying that if you make something, there's somebody out there in this world that is going to want to buy it, probably at the price that is going to work for you. But you probably have to find that person. So that's what you have to start thinking about when you're marketing some of your work. Okay, so what she's talking about is transforming materials and labels into goods and services. You have to balance your costs and revenues. You always consider when you're doing a business, the startup costs. How much did it cost you to get the equipment necessary to make your art? What were the capital costs, like computers, equipment, tools, electric tools, things like that? The depreciation on these tools, the depreciation on your car if you're working at art. What is that? Your inventory. You have to consider things in pricing your work, like your health care, your liability, your car, your contracts, all these sorts of things go into pricing your work. How much does it cost you to market your work? What is the administration costs? When we're making art, we're not making art all the time. We also have to spend time doing bookkeeping, sending out invoices, sending out bills. What's the cost of that? What's the cost of travel? And never overlook all the hidden costs when we're setting some kind of prices. So how do you price your artwork? So things that we consider: your time as factored in relationship to the following: the cost of the materials, the size of the work, the prices of your previous work sold, the frequency of your sales. What is the demand for it? Are you selling your works once a week, or do you just sell one piece a year? What will the market support? What will people actually pay for your work? And what is all your overhead costs that you have? What, like your studio, your rent, your food, your living expenses? What are your business costs, the studios, the insurance, the depreciation, the tools? And what about your markup? What's your profit? That's savings. And that's for emergencies that you're going to have. That's for your retirements. That's for raising your kids. Those are the things you have to think about when you're selling your work. Okay. Okay. At all points, all the points from any approach need to be interwoven and not treated in isolation. So don't confine yourself strictly to what works you've sold in the past. Always consider what other artists are charging for works of similar size and similar scope. This will help you to understand the value that you should be charging. And you will also need to consider the experience of those other artists and the number of works sold and whether they're in collections, places, etc. Okay, so I've kind of this is the last part on pricing, and these are things that I think everybody has to always consider. If you are doing work, any kind of work, you always have to charge more than the minimum wage for your time. So I would never, ever do any kind of artwork where I was probably going to be charging myself less than $15 an hour. So if you are making something that demands a lot of hours of labor, say you're making chainmail, armor or something, you might want to innovate and change how you do things, or you'd have to remember that art has value and consumers have the money. You have to find those people who are willing to pay the kind of prices that you need in order to establish your business. These are three vital points that you have to always remember, okay? The second part of how we make money is from the idea of copyright. Copyright is involved in different sorts of things. There's production of your work, exhibition, reproduction, publication, reprography, and sales. Okay, so let's just deal with some of these. Okay, what is copyright? Now, everything that we produce, they're all valuable creations. And sometimes these works can earn a lot of money in the marketplace. Others, things that we produce, might earn nothing at all. Regardless of their merit, or even if they've sold, or even if they have any kind of commercial value, all these works are protected under Canadian law. And they're set, and these conditions are set out in the Copyright Act. And what it means is that you own the copyright of a poem you write, a song you write, or any other original works. These rights are protected. And what the Copyright Act does, it prohibits other people from copying your work without permission. So no one can take a poem that you write and say it's theirs and start using it for money, okay? Because you have protection under the Copyright Act. No one can take your art piece that you've made and start putting it on shirts without your permission. Okay. So how can you make money from copyright? And now, is there some sort of standard or best practice for valuing our time? Okay, so best practices are the way interactions between an artist and those who engage with artists should work. Best practices, unlike the copyright law, are voluntary guidelines. They're not laws. So best practices need a buy-in from both artists and those who engage with artists. So in other words, people who commission your work, people who buy your work, anybody who you deal with as an artist, they need to have a buy-in. Now, what CARFAC Ralph has best practice documents that deal with the minimum fee for exhibiting artwork, for reproducing of artwork, and for all other works that artists can do. Okay, so let's give some examples here. So on a website called carfac-ralph.ca, there's something called the minimum recommended fee schedule. Now this provides kind of ideas of how much you should be charging for things if you, say, exhibit your work in a museum or a public gallery. So every year, this kind of minimum recommended fee schedule is updated, and there's kind of goes up 2% each year. So it kind of tells you what it is. If you ever want to access it, remember, just go to carfac-ralph.ca and you look for the year. Okay, so Canadian copyright laws provide artists with the right to be paid for exhibitions and reproductions, and most public funders require that museums and public galleries pay royalties and fees according to our guidelines. So if you have a show at the Southern Alberta Art Gallery in Lethbridge, they should, and they are paying these kind of fees. Okay, so what kind of fees are paid? So this is just from, again, that schedule at carfac-ralph.ca. This is for 2021. So this goes by kind of categories of how much an institution budget is. So if we go to, say, category 1, it would probably means if you had a solo show, you should be getting at least $2,119 as the minimum fee for an exhibition that is 3 months or less. Now, is there a kind of fee schedule for, say, if we license our artwork, say if you put one of your artworks in a calendar, what should you charge? There's kind of best practices guidelines for that. So this is a recommended fee schedule if you had your work in a calendar. This would be a calendar that is given away and not offered for sale. So again, the way this kind of schedule works is if, say, they produced up to 1,000 calendars, if you were on the cover of the calendar, you should be paid $357. If you were on an inner page, you should be paid $258. Now, if that company is producing calendars and say they produced 20,000 to 50,000 calendars, you should be paid for the front cover. You should be paid at least $1,300, $1,300, or if you want the cover, $1,796. So these are all things that you can consult. Again, this is what you should receive in terms of money for those sorts of purposes. Okay, so and there's other ways artists make money. They make money by teaching, by giving artist talks, by sitting on juries. Sometimes CARFAC, RAV have kind of schedules for what you should be charging sometimes for, say, if you're giving, say, an art talk that's under 4 hours or less, the standard rate is $322. If you're working, say, giving an art talk or something a whole day at a museum, you should be charging something like a minimum of $568. It might sound like a fair bit of money, but consider this is a one-off sort of thing. You have to pay insurance, you have to pay all these sorts of things out of that. Remember, to run a business, you have all kinds of hidden costs. This is what it costs. This is what you should be charging. Okay. Now, best practices are the way interactions between artists and those interacting with artists should work. And we said that they're voluntary, they're not laws. And they need a buy-in from both the artists and those that engage with artists. So CARFAC Alberta has also best practice documents that you can look to our website, carfacalberta.com, and we have best practice documents for how to work with galleries, both public and commercial galleries, what to do if you have a commission, how to deal with fundraisers, how to deal with contracts. They teach you, these best practice documents teach you how to become a bit more professional in your art practice. So let's give a few examples, okay? So what do best practices tell us? Now, CARFAC believes that artists are the best spokesmen for their work. However, artists need to understand both their rights and responsibilities to be able to direct their career in a professional manner. And organizations need to understand their rights and their responsibility when engaging with artists. And this ensures that all parties have a clear understanding of processes and expectations. This is the words that we think of here is things like transparency. That's what makes any kind of contract or any kind of engagement between an artist and those who want to employ us work really well. So what CARFAC does is we work to ensure that there's fair treatment for all artists and their relationships when they're working with people. Okay, so there's, as I said, there's a best practice document on fundraisers. And this kind of document would tell you what a fundraiser, how it should work. And just this last part of the sentence, or this last sentence is really important, since all art auctions keep at least part of the sale price of the work, and since none of them could operate without the artist's participation, artists should consider auctions as business opportunities and or charitable contributions rather than occasions to be grateful for exposure. So that thing that we started at the beginning, even a fundraiser, you are not doing it for exposure. You are doing it as a business opportunity. So in other words, best practices would tell us that if you're in a fundraiser, you as the artist should be getting 50% back of the sale price of what the work goes for. There are kind of rules that kind of indicate what is a good auction. What should you consider to be a good auction for yourself? Okay, it also gives you best practices on how to work with a commercial gallery. And what these documents tell us how to work with a commercial gallery, it tells you that a business is in the business to make a profit. And that means that the artist's work must be saleable. And it says for a relationship to work well between an artist and a commercial gallery, nobody has an advantage over the other. A relationship is going to work between you and a commercial gallery in this last sentence when the artist and the commercial gallery, when the relationship is open, realistic, and has written terms. So it has a contract and is carried out as a matter of business. So this is kind of the way things work best, is remember that you work with a commercial gallery, you should have a contract that would state that this is a business arrangement, and it should tell you all the ideas of how this business should be carried out. Okay, so why do we need things like best practices? And here's just examples of why. Have you ever received a contract from a gallery on the night of an opening or not at all? Have you ever been frustrated with a dealer or a store owner who avoids settling a payment for your work? Okay. Have you been unsure if it was the gallery's responsibility or your own to cover the insurance for your artwork when exhibited? So misunderstandings occur when a written agreement is not used. Sometimes one or both parties are left wondering, what are their rights and responsibilities? So artists engage in short-term contracts and working conditions always vary. So if you want to keep good relationships between people, you have to have things in writing, because misunderstandings happen when there is no written agreement. And this is what best practices says about written agreements and contracts. Formal written agreements and contracts increase protection for artists and their intellectual property, and clearly define the rights and responsibilities of both those that engage the service of artists and artists themselves. So, in other words, a contract protects both sides. It protects you as an artist and the person who either purchases your work or wants to sell it, because it clearly states what both sides expect should happen. All parties should read, clearly understand, and sign the agreements. All these things you can go to CARFACalberta.com. You can download 7 best practice documents which would tell you the way things should happen. Okay, now what is a contract? A contract, what goes in a contract is who, what, when, where, why, and how. So you have to answer all those questions. That's exactly what goes in. So you're answering all the questions of what happens if a work falls off the wall in a gallery? Who is responsible? What happens if somebody steals one of my works when it's on display? Who is responsible? Who is paying for the liquor or at the opening? Who is paying for the invitations? When do I actually get paid if something is sold? All these questions are written into a contract. So remember, who, what, when, where, why, and how. You have to put in kind of, some kind of dispute resolution mechanisms. So in other words, before a contract has to go to small claims court, maybe there could be some means of resolving this problem to both parties' satisfaction before we actually have to go to the courts, because the courts only cost both people money. So how do you prepare a contract? You visualize the problems that can occur. Always make sure you are asking for enough money. I can't emphasize that enough. When you're writing a contract, always make sure you are asking for enough money. Don't think, oh, I'm I'm just really new and things like that. Always ask for money and think of everything that can go wrong, and that's what you put in a contract. Now, if you wanted to get sample contracts, a good place for free sample contracts on the web is at the Carfax Saskatchewan website, and there's just links there which has sample contracts for everything, for sales of your artwork, for dealing with a commercial gallery, for public art galleries, for copyright licensing, for commissions, for lease, for community art. They have all kinds of contracts that you can modify. Okay, so what is my advice on best practices? It's to have everything in writing. A written contract protects you. Otherwise, you could just do an email record of your discussion that took place, recording of an in-person meeting if you ask for permission, or if you get off the phone with somebody, you could write it in your diary or a journal entry where you record what was discussed at the meeting. That gives you some kind of proof if you don't actually have a contract. They work kind of like a contract. Okay. How do you become more professional in your art practice? Okay. How do we become more professional? Well, the way we become more professional is through knowledge. From school, from books, from galleries, from friends, from acquaintances, through art clubs, through professional development talks like this. Where do we get our knowledge? Well, we get it from various places. We get it from the Allied Arts Council of Lethbridge, from CARFAC Alberta, organizations like the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, the Alberta Society of Artists, CARFAC, the Edmonton Arts Council, the Edmonton or the Alberta Community Art Clubs Association. We get it from Calgary Arts Development, from Art Rubicon, from galleries like Southern Alberta Art Gallery in Lethbridge. We get it from commercial sites like Akimbo, where you can find out what kind of opportunities are out there if you're ever interested in, say, public art opportunities. Okay. We get knowledge through communities. Communities of all sorts are vital to an artist's development. And remember, opportunities, to find out about opportunities, it's a two-way street. You gain by being engaged. Artists, as artists, we probably work in isolation for long periods. And it's very good and it's vital for us to connect with people socially and professionally. And by doing that, various communities need to know you and your work exist in order for them to use you and to potentially contract you to do some kind of work. Okay, how do we do research? I mean, that's always a question. And how do we do research? We probably do things like ask our friends. We join clubs or an art organization. We take a class. We use the resources at your library. We use the internet. YouTube has videos that teach everything. We discover what we want and what we need. And always remembering that a lot of times we are going to be doing it ourselves, DIY. Groups like CARFAC, it's an organization. CARFAC has been around now for 53 years, since 1968, and it's a group of artists working for artists. And the first founder of CARFAC said, no one is more qualified to speak on behalf of artists than artists themselves. So what CARFAC is, it's an organization that advocates for artists, and it advocates for artists to be able to talk for themselves, to negotiate for themselves, to talk to engagers and say, I need a certain kind of money. This is the minimum fee schedule. This is what you should be paying me. It teaches artists to negotiate on themselves. So it sets a kind of standard that we can say, this is what professionals should be paid. That's what CARFAC is about. Okay, so what did we discuss tonight? We discussed a bit of why artists need to get paid. We discussed kind of ways of how to make money from your art. And again, we did kind of three things: how to price your artwork. We looked at a bit of ways we can make money from copyright. So in other words, if we ever have one of our art pieces used for a calendar or maybe for a book cover, there's kind of minimum prices we should be charging for this. We also learned about things like if you are working, say, on an art jury, if you are doing a presentation of a professional development presentation, you should probably be paid to do this because you are using all your skills as an artist to teach people about these things. You have all this skill and you shouldn't be sharing this necessarily for free. This is how we make our money. What else we learned tonight is there is an importance. We learned about what best practices are and how important they are. Best practices are industry standards, and they are not necessarily laws, but they work when both artists and engagers agree to them. And we learned a bit about professionalizing your art practice by doing research, by learning how to work with others, learning what goes into a contract. So we learned a bit more about that sorts of things. And this is getting right near the end where we're open to all kinds of questions. So one of my first questions would be, what did you learn? And I think what we learned a bit is that we have to always probably do it yourself, but there are resources that can help us. Resources like CARFAC, resources like all those places that I mentioned, places that we can go for help, joining groups, things like that. So you're doing it yourself, but you're doing it yourself by learning how to do the research. Okay. This is, if you believe what you heard tonight, please consider joining CARFAC. Just go to the website carfacalberta.com, and on the main page, there's something to say join. You just click on that and you can join actually from our website itself, or this is kind of a form that we can send you in the mail, or you can print off if you want to send in a check. Okay. And I'm going to end the show, and I am stopping to share the screen, and I'm really going to invite all kinds of questions from everybody. So if there's questions in the chat, we'll just start seeing or whatever.
Yeah, it looks like we have. Thank you so much, Chris. That was wonderful. So informative and just such important information for all artists. I have a question from Rosemary. I think this was asked at the very beginning of the when we started. It just says, just wondering about CARFAC and permanent residents from a different country. Is there anything we need to acknowledge?
So
there?
the rules for CARFAC applies to everybody who is living in Canada, okay? So it doesn't matter if you're a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen, you should be getting paid this much. These are the rules that are for Canada. So if you are dealing with a Canadian institution, it doesn't even matter if you're living in Canada. If you are actually showing at the Art Gallery Ontario, you should be paid whether you're living in Australia or Iceland or any place around, okay? So it doesn't matter your status, but they just apply to Canada. Canada is one of the only places in the world where artists would be paid for if they have an exhibition, say, in a place like a public gallery or an artist-run center where the purpose of the exhibition is not to make sales. It's one of the only countries in the world where that happens. So in other words, it doesn't happen in the States. It doesn't happen in most European countries. Canada, it happens because of organizations like CARFAC who advocated that artists should get paid for that. And it's organizations like CARFAC that develop these kind of minimum payment schedules to show people that there's kind of a minimum fee that you should charge if you, say, have your work on, say, a calendar. There should be a minimum fee attached to that. They also have these fees for if you do kind of like professional work, like being on an art jury or something like that. They have fees associated with that. So what these fees all do is it gives you a starting point to know that your work has value and that there's some kind of place you can go to look for a kind of, this is around the price. So in other words, if somebody offers you something, then you can say, gee, that's not enough.
Yeah.
You can kind of decide what that does. Now, no one just follows these rules 100%, not even artists, okay? So you have to decide where you're going to break a rule. So in other words, you know, somebody might, your friend might be producing a calendar or something and they say, all we have is $50. Then you have to decide. You can say, I might do it because I like you, but really that's the kind of dubious thing. I used to do a lot more of them years ago. I do very few of them now, okay? And why? Because there was no benefit coming to me. So I used to give to fundraisers years ago where I probably got nothing. Now I'm less likely to do that. Why? Because I can give you my personal experience of, 30 years in the art business. I got one sale that came from, that somebody came to me after a fundraiser or something that they actually bought something at regular price. All the other things never dealt to anything. I just gave things away for free. And what you discover with fundraisers too is that sometimes those people who bought them are your audience. If they didn't buy them there, they might have bought them from you for full price.
Right, right.
So that's some of the things you have to think about.
Mm.
So I'm open to all kinds of questions.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Rosemary said, thank you so much. A very comprehensive answer. Yeah, if anyone has some questions, like please feel free to put them in either the chat or the Q&A box, and I will read them out. So we'll just give a couple seconds and see if anyone wants to add to that.
And I'm just going to, if anybody wants to get in touch with me or ask questions, I'm just writing my email in there.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay. So it's chris@carfacalberta.com. So if you have questions about any of what we discussed, also if you want me to share a PDF of what I presented, I'm more than happy to. Why don't you just send me an email and I'm happy to share it with everybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. That's great. Thank you so much, Chris. Awesome. And Tara, did you want to do any closing words at all?
I just want to thank Chris so much for providing us this really vital information. I know we discuss this a lot, and there are a lot of challenges around how to price things and, getting paid and offering your services for free. Just to let you know, at the Allied Arts Council, we'll always pay you for your services. Not always CARFAC rates, unfortunately, but we'll always offer you remuneration, and we will never advertise an opportunity unless it is a paid opportunity. And yeah, we think it's important that the work you do and what you contribute to the community deserves remuneration. So our next artwork is October 7th, topic to be decided yet, but certainly, so the first Thursday of every month, we will be doing artwork all the way through to the end of the year, perhaps not December, but we have a couple more months to go. So we hope you join us for that. And also I wanted to let you know that Arts Days is at the end of September. It is going to be September 23rd, 24th, 25th, and 26th. Some of the great events are the Gallery Stroll on September 24th, the AC Pop-Up Gallery, SAG, Mortar and Brick Pop-Up Gallery, CASA, the kiosks on Rotary Square. Lots of fun, fabulous art to see, and come out and join us for that fun event. And as well, there's Family Affair on the Square on Sunday, some opportunities for kids, especially live music, pottery, learning how to do chalk art with Eric Dick. So look out for that information. And I just want to thank you again, Chris. Thank you so much. It was fantastic information and really important read.
Well,
Yes.
thank you. And I enjoyed this. Okay.
Thanks
so
so much. All right, everyone, have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you again sometime soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Take care. Have a good night, Chris.
Yeah.